Bill Garrett is a fabulous musician. He's a great guitar player, but he's also a doer of things. He's the kind of guy who sees a situation that maybe isn't quite right or needs to be adjusted or whatever, and he jumps in and does it. He's a doer, and throughout his career he's been very instrumental. A lot of behind the scenes work that a lot of people don't really know about, that where Bill has made a difference in the folk and roots community of Canada.
We sort of had parallel paths at different points, but all of the time and throughout all of the things that I think a number of people that came out of that era, people have really tried to help others make music, one way or the other, either with them or helping them in other ways. And for me, that's Bill 100%.
When I was 11 years old, I came down with a disease called nephritis, and it put me out of school for a year. And in that time, an uncle of mine, my Uncle Lennox, came and gave me a guitar. What I didn't discover until later was that he had tuned it to an open chord. It wasn't tuned like a normal guitar was, but I took to it anyway, and I figured out where some of the chords would have to be. I realized the guitar was tuned totally different than what I'd been playing it, and I had to learn all over again. I really sort of dug into the guitar, and played backup guitar for a few singers, and ended up in New York playing for a couple of people there.
I met Bill when I was a teenager and first came to Toronto, and he was a part owner in the Toronto Folklore Centre at that time, and that's a place I gravitated to as a guitar player and a budding folkie. And actually, at that period, I took some guitar lessons from Bill. He taught me to play some ragtime pieces on the guitar, like complex pieces.
Moving to Toronto and teaching at the Toronto Folklore Centre was my introduction to a whole new world of people in Toronto. Fiddler's Green Coffee House was a huge part of that. The Mariposa Folk Festival was a big part of that. And all of those people knew each other. It was a big scene of folks.
And then for a short time, he was part of another group that used to play regularly at Fiddler's Green, called J.P. Ringward and the Heartbreak of Psoriasis. I bet that name's come up in your research. And it was a fantastic group with the most incredible sense of humor and all this humorous songs they would do with excellent musicianship to back it up. It was fantastic, and Bill was the guitar player in that band, so I'd see him regularly there.
Shortly after we met, I started a folk music program for CBC Radio called Touch the Earth, which Sylvia Tyson hosted. And early on in that program, we brought Bill in to produce a segment called The Songwriters. It was a half-hour segment.
I met him one day, I'm not sure why, but I met him for a beer after his work one day, and he popped this question at me. He said, "Do you think you could interview people?" And I stupidly said, "Well, sure, Paul, I could do that."
So it became a very popular segment of the program, and a lot of very well-known songwriters appeared on that, including people like Willie P. Bennett, Stan Rogers, and Colleen Peterson.
And he was kind of our connection to the young singer-songwriters that we liked to feature on the show, and he seemed to have a real nose for finding really good, really interesting people. We realized that people weren't going to be able to buy those records in stores, and so we would give names and addresses, Stan Rogers' mum's address, that sort of thing. And, Bill was very much a part of that. As I say, he just seemed to have a great ear for people. Of course, he's a wonderful player as well.
I first met him in my head when he was co-hosting Touch the Earth with Sylvia Tyson, and I just thought, wow, who is this guy? Seems to know a lot about music, and he's really good at expressing it. And those were really wonderful days for folk music at the CBC.
But Bill had a very long and illustrious career with CBC. He even joined me when we were planning the new building for Toronto, and he was a key player in that planning effort.
They were involved in planning studios, and studios that were really state-of-the-art, and studios where it wouldn't just be about talk, it would be about performance. and that was really critical. But where a musician could absolutely sound their best whenever they were recorded, and or playing live, so and that was really, really critical.
I think he's produced close to 100 albums as an independent producer, and this is something I don't think everyone is aware of either. He's such a behind-the-scenes and modest guy. He doesn't go out bragging about himself, and so it's a lot of these things that people don't know.
And Bill is my partner at Borealis Records, and some people may know that 4 of us started this label 22 years ago. Ken Whiteley, Paul Mills, Bill, and I. But after the first couple of years, the other guys, at that point, you should understand, it was a labor of love for all of us. And Ken and Paul were just running out of time to do their role, and so they pulled back. And it's been Bill and I running it for the last 2 decades.
Since he is such a respected musician, and since he's such an honest and fair business person, he's got the perfect persona for doing the job that he's doing. He believes 100% in what he's doing. He doesn't cut corners. He doesn't, say things that he honestly doesn't believe. So you can always take what Bill says to you at what its value is.
I would try to play Borealis productions whenever I possibly could and interview Borealis musicians, because I think through Bill and Grit, there was always this sense of, hey, you've got to hear this. There was a sense of real discovery, and they were presenting musicians that had never been played anywhere else, and giving them often their biggest break in their career to date.
The government decided that it was going to shut down the sound recording program at the Canada Council. And it required that, and a number of people did, and Bill was one of the major people who did, to speak directly to a hearing at government, to tell the government why the sound recording program at Council was different than the recording programs at Factor. And the difference between commercial music and, I would call it creative music, but to cover all the sort of genres of folk and all of that sort of stuff. And the fact that, and at this point he had Borealis going, and so he was able to speak both from that position, but also as a player.
I mean, he did so much in Ontario. So much of his CBC work was here, the Folklore Centre, music, never mind starting Borealis Records, And he was living in Toronto, but love took him to Montreal, or back to Montreal, where he had been for a while, working for CBC there as well.
We had been seeing each other a bit before then and said, would you do some background vocals? So I said, sure. Went to Toronto and did that. And then after that, I had sort of gone into a bit of retirement musically because I had had my daughter, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to do music again. And so we worked up a repertoire and wrote a few songs and started playing music together. Yeah, and pulled me right out of retirement. It was great.
He was also a key player in the establishment of the Canadian Folk Music Awards, again with Grit. They were collectively very dissatisfied about the fact that the Juno Awards had two categories for folk and roots music. And so you would get a singer-songwriter getting Best Traditional Album of the Year and things like that, which made everyone's head shake. So Bill, along with Grit and a few other folks, established the Folk Music Awards to get that set straight.
Bill and I were just, moaning about the Juno Awards, and with their minimal categories for the folk and roots stuff. You have, trad bands from Quebec competing against Bruce Cockburn, and it makes no sense. They're totally separate styles of music. They should be in their own worlds, right? So we were just moaning about that, and we finally said, maybe we should just do our own thing.
It came out of the question of, how do we get this music better known? And in other words, what can we create that will bring more attention to this kind of music? Because this music's all across the country. By the 90s, there were folk festivals all over the country. And yet, could you get anything in a mainstream newspaper? Could you read anything about folk music in any of the mainstream media? You couldn't. We decided that one of the ways that mainstream media would pay attention is if it was a contest.
having someone like Bill working so well and so hard behind the awards just increased the credibility right from the get-go.
The idea that folk music was just, you know, some guy with a guitar talking about tough stories. Bill saw the possibilities, and he was hearing the possibilities, that it was so many different kinds of music, and that it was music from all around the world, and that it was music from indigenous communities, and all of these different categories got their honor, got their due.
Bill has certainly made a difference and continues to make a difference by being a very strong supporter and advocate and enabler of artists in this genre of music.
He wants to help people. He wants to give it out, and he does. Never fails.
When I think about Bill, I still love to think about Bill, but I think about the word honor, and he is so much about honor and integrity himself, and about understanding, and really about sharing the stage and making the stage as big as it can possibly be.
He's been well, he's one of the pillars of the community. Yeah, it's that simple, actually. Bill is a pillar of this community.
This award is so deserved. It's the highest award in the folk community in Canada, even though it's coming from a provincial organization. And everybody understands the significance of it, and it's an honor, but it's great to see it being given to a very deserving person. And Bill certainly fits that bill. Bill fits that bill. Oh, shit, that's your last quote.